was telling my colleague Kristen Welker, however, that it was that the processing center that President Biden visited, that the migrants at that location had been processed by the time he arrived. So it was not intentional that he decided not to meet with any migrants, but that the Biden administration is trying to highlight the recent efforts that it has undertaken in order to reduce the flow of migrants into this area. Local officials have been saying now for quite some time that El Paso and other border communities have been overwhelmed by the increasing number of migrants. The Biden administration, though, says that influx has dropped by about 70% since the high in mid-December. Still, we spoke with a volunteer at this shelter yesterday who told us about her frustration with the Biden administration and others before. Take a listen.
Border communities are bearing the brunt of federal inaction, and this has been passed on by several administrations. And we really need help. We need the government to have open lines of communication with organizations like Sacred Heart Church to turn the tide and to think about how we are welcoming people into our country.
And Jose, we're here again in front of this church shelter. And just within the past few seconds, as that interview was playing, I asked this man if he would appear on camera and say, ¿Cuál es su nombre? Luca, eres de Venezuela. ¿Cuánto tiempo lleva aquí?
Llevo 16 días.
16 días. He says he's been here for 16 days. Jose, entonces, ¿por qué decidiste venir a otro estado?
We want to move forward here real quick and get to the deeper part of all this immigration problem stuff, because it is a ongoing, challenging, actually it goes beyond a problem. It's actually a crisis that has evolved to this level that it's in right here.
Help going forward?
Jose, as you well know, this is such a complex issue and is going to demand a very complex solution. However, I am feeling glimmers of optimism just by the sheer fact that President Biden went to the border. He spoke. Actions speak louder than words. And the fact that he went there is a signal that something has to be done, because the can has been kicked down the road for so long. I would say over the last 30 years, if I had to give it a number. And the other thing that is giving me a little glimmer of hope, Jose, is that the United States is engaging with Mexico. Because remember, immigration isn't just about the U.S. It is a hemispheric issue, to Mike's point. So if we're really going to move the ball in terms of an immigration solution, President Biden and his administration and the Congress, Republicans, need to engage with their Mexican counterparts as a start because of our 2,000-mile border. But secondly, they also need to be working closely with South America, with Canada. So I mean, I have great hope for the summit that is going to take place in Mexico. There's a lot of difficult issues that they're going to have to deal with, migration just being one of them. But I think it is where we need to start, and better late than never.
On that sliver of optimism, I think it's a perfect way of wrapping up this part of our conversation. And Gabe and Victoria, I know that you'll join me in showing a little bit of celos, a little bit of desire to be there with Mike. He is in the Zócalo Capitalino. Mike, the best places to eat and enjoy this beautiful culture is right where you are, in the center, the heartbeat of the Mexican capital. I thank you, Mike, Gabe, and Victoria, for being with us this morning.
Check your inbox. I'm going to ask for some recommendations, Jose.
On their way. The three of us can give you a lot of those. Thanks, guys. And with us now to continue our conversation this morning about this issue is the mayor of El Paso, Mayor Oscar Leeser. I thank you very much for being with us. Hey, Mayor, I'm just wondering, and we were together just 2.5 weeks ago, right there by the bus station. You had already put out a whole series of things. You put portalettes, and you put some places where people could, in that bus that Gabe Gutierrez just showed us, where folks can go in there and at least find a little heat. You were opening up the stadium. What's the situation there in El Paso today?
You know, we're as you saw earlier, there where the two buses were, and that's our warming stations. And what we've been doing is making sure that we start opening some shelters for our asylum seekers. And we opened the Civic Center when you were here last time, and now we've opened up a school. So you see that people are starting to have a place where they can spend the night and be out of the elements. So that's one of the things that we've seen a lot, and we'll continue to do that. We've seen the numbers continue to decrease as when 3 weeks ago we were having about 2,500, 2,600 a day, and now we're down to about 700 a day.
Mayor, why then are there people sleeping in tents and under the those emergency blankets, and why do we see them at the airport and we see them at the bus station? So what is causing this problem? And I mean problem, I mean people that are out there in the cold where they are subjected to just very cold conditions.
And the airport, we did have about 600 at the airport. We're down to about 200 a night at the airport, because anybody that has a ticket that's going to be leaving in within the next 12 hours will be at the airport. And those are that they have sponsored, and they have a family member they're going to meet, and they're actually buying their own tickets to be going to meet with their families or their relatives. You talk about why they're on the streets, because these people are really afraid to be sent back under the Title 42. Most of them are from Venezuela. We figured that's about 90% of those are from Venezuela. We've been working with the diocese to try to get them to come off the streets, and we've had the bishop go out there and talk to them, and really because we have some shelters, we have some areas for them that they can go to, but they're not trusting anybody. They really believe.
While he's talking, I'm going to go ahead and intervene here towards reading some facts about Mexico. In 2016, Mexico City was recongenitalized from being a federal district to a state. That is right. Mexico States is a state. Let me see here. It looks like there was a revolution on March the 2nd in 1836, whenever Texas declared its own independence. The population rate right now in Mexico City is 22,085,000. It has increased of 63%. Metro area, I don't know why so much, or 51%. Mexico City is about 573 square miles, and New York City is about 302 square miles. That gives you any kind of idea towards the size of Mexico City. The reason why people move to Mexico City is because Mexico, rural areas come into the city seeking better jobs, education, and higher standards of living. Mexico City is the 5th largest population center in the world. Number 1 being Tokyo, Japan, then India, then China, and Brazil, of all places, and then Mexico City. In other words, there's more people in Brazil than there is in Mexico City. These are facts that I'm just reading over to you real quick. Healthcare, food, transportation, just a few of the things that are significant cheaper in Mexico. That's the reason why so many people want to move to Mexico. While they're going over all these immigrant issues, which should have been gone over years ago, whenever his administration first acknowledged that these social society differences was so empowering towards the way that they was scrambling toward wanting to come to the United States border, in trying to seek out a better life or a better living. in which there's nothing wrong with anybody wanting to seek out a better life and a better living. But I'm just afraid that in the next few years, what we're going to run into is people that are extremely wealthy are going to be able to have more flexibility than the poor and the unfortunate people, to the degree that let's see right here real quick. This is in Brazil. Okay, that went on down in Brazil pertaining to a standoff or some sort of an uprising. We'll get right on that just in a second. Anyways, whenever you get to looking at the problems that have arisen just within the past year or so, there has been a great deal of focus on the water reservoir chains here on the planet all of a sudden miraculously basically a phenomenon of drying up. And it wasn't until about last year, whenever these occurrences started coming out to the forefront, especially whenever we started seeing our lakes and our rivers here in America start drying up the way that they was drying up. I'm just afraid that the rich and the powerful are always going to be able to exceed over the poor and the unfortunate people. And as we get further into this thing pertaining to the water crisis that's happening all over the planet, we're going to see large portions of immigration of people migrating to other areas because they're not going to be able to survive like they originally could or would be able to if things was normal. Things is not normal. For some reason, the scientists has failed to grasp this, to see this. And it wasn't until, like I said, about last year, whenever I started bringing a great deal of focuses upon not just one river pertaining to the Colorado River out in California and pertaining to our Ecuador systems that are drying up out west, but rivers basically all over the world, including down in South America. So the problem right now that we're addressing is actually only a temporary problem in comparison to what's going to occur in the next 5 years from now, unless we can turn this around. And I mean turn it around tremendously, which is going to require a great deal of retraining, rethinking. It's going to require a great deal of the nations to have to pull together and quit using so much oil that we are steadily burning up out of the ground, these precious resources that was put there for a purpose. And we're basically disturbing the ecosystem that's below our feet that we don't quite understand yet, but it's there, just the same as the ecosystem is above our feet, just like the bugs that get ate up by bigger bugs. And you got big fish that eat little fish. You got big animals that eat little animals. You got, the food chain goes all the way down. Well, these problems that we're looking at right now pertaining to these immigrants that want to better their lives, I don't have a problem at all in anybody coming over here to America wanting to better their life. But my point that I'm making is this: we're still being distracted towards actually looking at the main problem that not America, but the world is fixing to have to face off on just within the next few years if we do not have a immediate change of action. And I know some of you have heard me say this before, and I may sound like Groundhog's Day or a broken record. But the fact of the matter is, if you'll go and analyze the data that's already stored with Google and other search engines out there, you will find that the water supply is steadily dwindling all over the planet. The reason for this is because the planet is escaping its heat or its energy from the core, from the inside of the earth, that is now escaping to the outside of the earth. And the reason why it was escaping was because those resources was put there not for us to travel and look good and cool on Sunday, wearing our cool glasses and act pretty and nice, or arrogant or whatever you want to call, but they was put there for a protection shield to protect the outer layers of the earth and warming up, like we know that the inside of the earth has been now going on hundreds of years. Hundreds of years, the scientists have known that the center of the earth was nothing more than molten lava, and basically it's spinning centrifugal in a centrifugal force. I don't know how many miles an hour. I don't know if it's going slow, fast. I don't know that much about all that. I just know that right now we have about 70 active hurricanes that are spewing from the core of the earth, and over 90% of them are in the oceans, are in our seas, are on the bottom floors. And that is what is causing the water to warm up, and what is causing the ground to warm up, which the water is what's melting the ice, but what's causing the ground to warm up is the heat now is escaping through these areas, that we're thinking that everything is coming from the sun, everything is coming from the sun. The sun is causing everything. The outer atmosphere with all the carbon gases that we're pumping up into the clouds are affecting our planet, and that's what's causing the planet to warm up. Scientists have been looking at this upside down. There's no doubt that the carbon dioxide gases that we're pumping up into the atmosphere, especially over in China and other countries that don't care about smog and pollution, air pollution, there's no doubt that we are affecting our ozone. We are affecting our upper atmosphere. But it's not what is affecting the upper atmosphere that is affecting the planet Earth. It's rather the other way around. It's the planet Earth that's affecting all of it together. In other words, it's in conjunction. And I use the expression as a ping pong ball game, to where one ping ponger bounces the ball to the other one, and the other one bounces it back to the other one, and the other one bounces back to the other one. Well, that's basically how our world works, in conjunction to a ecosystem. Once you take the ecosystem out of balance, you will see repercussions on the planet such as you have never ever dreamed before, that is now beginning to be obvious that are occurring. We're starting to see severe hurricanes that now are generated almost yearly, to the degree that these storms used to only come every 100 years, and then we narrowed it down every 50 years, and then we narrowed it down every 20 years, and then we narrowed it down every 10 years, and now they're happening almost every year. And we're talking about Category 4, Category 5 plus hurricanes that are developing either on this side of the continent pertaining to the United States, or on the other side. We're also seeing massive amounts of thermal frost melting in various areas, and it's not just happening in Alaska. It's also happening in other places like Norway and up towards Greenland and places like that, where basically foundations of houses are breaking and giving away, because now all of a sudden their ecosystem is changing, and they're having to reinvent on what their standard building codes was. Now they're having to change those building codes. So everything is becoming disproportionalized. As these things continue to deportionalize, you will see drastic measures being taken by countries all over the planet. And you will see some of these countries that does not take this serious pertaining to what we're doing to our planet. You will see them become very barbaric in the essence of their own survival, even if it means showing their barbaricness to other countries just in order to survive. Whenever it talks about the million-man army or whatever, I don't know, I forgot now what the number is, pertaining to the great battle that's going to happen over where the Euphrates River is right now, that has dried up about 85% in comparison to what it used to be 25, 30 years ago. Whenever it talks about this great battle, that the blood will get as deep as a horse's bridle. First of all, I've already explained this one time before on another video. You have to start to ask yourself the question that whatever is going to generate this problem towards the river Euphrates drying up, don't you think it's going to affect all the other water systems on all the other 7 continents? Sure it will. Secondly, why are the people going to battle? They're going to battle for survivalist tactics, and in addition towards trying to reduce the suffering and trying to reduce the population. I know that sounds cruel and it sounds barbaric. I know it sounds off the wall that anybody would say anything like that, especially somebody that has always just been a civilian.
See, with today's vote,
just been a civilian all his life.
well,
Never actually been in the military as far as on paper. But one of the expressions that I was trying to bring out, and I'm still trying to bring out, of the movie called The Last Samurai, of how personal that it becomes with people such as myself in understanding not only is it a good thing to fight and die for a good cause, but it's actually a better way of going out other than going out in a slow, cruel, indifferent way of all the grief and despair that goes along with that. And only people that has military thinking or is involved with some sort of action of great services for their country is going to be able to relate to the things that I'm talking about as far as dying a warrior's death. Dying for a good cause. That's the reason why so many countries after about 300 BC tagged on to the teachings of Jesus. Not only was it a good way of life for people, but it was a very, very dignified standard in the way that Jesus was looked upon at first towards being a rebel, but then later he was looked upon as being a savior. And to be able to match that or meet that bar that was set so high pertaining to the way Christ come and the way Christ left, today still has yet to be matched on just about any level pertaining to how he done it, and could still smile at his enemies and say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I mean, I realize that I myself has strong personal convictions whenever it comes to believing in God and the teachings of Christ and etc., that I try to maintain and practice on a day-to-day level, not just on Sunday, not just on Easter or Christmas, but on a day-to-day level. But even on a day-to-day level at the age of 61, I don't know that I'm strong enough to be able to go through a third of what Jesus went through on the day of his crucifixion and still be able to love and be remorseful towards the people, to say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That's the reason why I say to this day, his birth and his death has never been matched pertaining to the bar that was brought into existence whenever Jesus come to the planet. What we're fixing to face off on are going to be a great deal more bigger problems than immigrants, illegal immigrants coming to America. But what you're going to actually see is migration of various immigrants that aren't just going to be going to America, but they're going to be going to the most sacredest spot to go to, those that are safest and those that have plenty of resources of supplies to be able to take care of each other. But even at that, eventually the strongest of the strong will dwindle and will become a crisis level on the things that not only they drink, but the things that they eat, according to the Bible, according to biblical Bible prophecies. Now, this winter, I made a statement just about the time that the Mississippi got so low that it had become a crisis here in America, and all the ponds and rivers and watersheds and tributaries and all the other stuff, lakes and etc., was drying up too, that there would be significant rainfall in America this winter. But that the summer would be worse than what it was last summer, pertaining to the heat and the way that the heat generated up onto itself the way that it did last year. Why? Because of the occurrences that's going on below our feet. We have been lied to because various people have been deceived in not recognizing these facts, and they was wanting to put it more so on the sun. Well, the sun's causing it. The sun's causing it. The ozone's breaking down, and the sun's what's causing the world to warm up. Wrong. If that would have been the case, we couldn't have went outside without getting second, third, and possibly 4-degree burn, if that's even possible, in regards to that. This right now, what you're seeing is over in Brazil, where another big
1,200 individuals arrested in Brazil. I mean, we saw the images of people breaking into these federal buildings. They went into Congress. They went into the presidential palace and the Supreme Court, destroyed furniture, works of art. The windows, you can see the damage here. But eventually, the military did come in on Sunday, and as Lula da Silva indicated, they have taken control. They have initiated an investigation. And it's interesting, Jose, because you see these images and what's happened in Brazil, and there's parallels to what happened in the U.S. on January 6th. Now, this is just coincidence. This is a separate incident, of course, but lots of parallels. Meanwhile, Bolsonaro has taken to Twitter to say that entering these government buildings was wrong, but it's sort of an ambiguous tweet, because after that he also said that there's no proof of him being responsible for what's happened.
So what you're having here is people being challenged towards being the king of the mountain in particular countries or in particular areas. That is more of an ego thing right now than it is a survival thing. But eventually this will change. This will change to a survival tactic, to where only the strongest survive. And it will no longer be based upon egos towards whether or not you think that somebody won or lost the election. Whenever Donald Trump done what Donald Trump done, pertaining to him resisting against the American political system and basically planting that seed of resistances, it wasn't just a seed that was planted here in America, but it was a seed that's going to be planted all over the planet. In which in some cases, in some countries, that seed needed to be planted because of the corruption that goes on within those countries, of the oligarchs, of the way that even to this day, they refuse to allow for their citizens to have any type of say-so, any type of humanitarian rights. They refuse to bend, bow, or bow in regards towards a football player. He's finally starting to heal up, and I'm glad to see that.
And the Buffalo Bills' very first play back since Damar Hamlin's on-field collapse and cardiac arrest, running back Naeem Hines went the distance, returning the game's opening kickoff for a touchdown.
This place is absolutely going wild. Oh, we just said this is storybook. This is almost fate.
An electric, emotional touchdown for a team and community hurting for days.
It was spiritual. It really was.
I was very impressed the way that they prayed for him whenever that first initiated itself on the field, of how that a group of people stuck together truly as team members. I was really, really impressed. And they're impressed now because of his significant healing, and they put a great deal of emphasis upon God and modern medicine pertaining to him being able to heal up the way that he has. Which I don't want to deviate from the seriousness of what I'm trying to say here about the planet and about the planet's resources. Whenever you have a planet that's got almost 7 billion people on it, you're going to have you're going to have resources that's going to be strained in some areas more so than others. We have been fortunate here in America to the point that, by and large, even though we have went through a labor shift here in America for the past 25, 30 years, they are still pretty good about bringing in supplies, regardless whether it be in this state or that state or all the states, in regards towards keeping the people by and large happy. Once more, you'll start seeing a struggle in those supplies that will basically go to the highest bidder. And this is where our government is going to have to learn to take care of itself, kind of like pre-managing the toilet paper issue over here in America whenever we first heard about COVID. Various stores, various agencies are going to have to learn that just because people's got the money to back up to the front door and basically load up over $10,000 worth of toilet paper that somebody tried to take back once they realized that the COVID problem wasn't going to be as bad as what they thought it was, and that particular store rejected to give them a reimbursement on that toilet paper. But I'm just using that as an example that just because people has the money to be able to go out here and buy 2 or 3 refrigerators and fill it full of all kinds of meat and all kinds of other food, on the level of causing other people to dwindle and do without, is not only going to be immorally unfair, but it's going to be unethically wrong for people to do this. They'll hoard of those that can afford to be able to go buy $10,000 worth of toilet paper. They'll hoard. Somehow or another, the governments are going to have to control in what is sold, how much it's sold, regardless whether it's sold to the poorest of the poor or the richest of the rich. In the next 5 years pertaining to the resources, it's going to dwindle. Because I'm telling you now, if the water supply is going to dwindle, like I think that it's going to, towards putting out this advisory, that is going to affect not just the water in general, but it's going to affect how we use the water. It's going to affect in how that we flush our toilets, how often that we take showers. It's going to affect towards whether or not we water our lawns, or whether or not we get to wash our cars. It's going to affect towards how much water that we actually waste on a day-to-day level. I try to be very, very conservative with not only my electricity, but my water too as well. I don't want to take water that can be used or reused and not use it. Because a lot of times that's exactly what I do. I use the water for one purpose, and then I'll turn around and save that water and use it for another purpose. Like washing the car, or like doing other things, watering the plants or whatever. So people are going to have to become creative. They're going to have to motivate a different way of thinking in how the society is going to survive, and we're going to have to quit using so much fossil fuel and other precious resources out of the ground that was put there for the world's survivalist, for the world's survival. And if we don't do that, it's going to get very, very ugly in the next 5 years from now. And I'm just not talking about a few immigrants, illegal immigrants crossing the Rio Grande. I'm talking about masses of amounts of people that will have to migrate to other areas just to survive. I am so glad right now, and I realize what I'm saying to some is going to sound raw, it's going to sound ugly, it's going to sound pathetic, it's going to sound barbaric, but I'm so glad that the major rains are happening right now out in Colorado and up towards the hillsides and over in the Lake Mead, Colorado River area, because it helps to put water back into those areas to where maybe we'll be able to buy some more time. Because if the way that it was going as of last year, in the next 3 years from now, there would probably be massive amounts of migration coming from the west, coming over here to the east, that would affect even our lifestyles over here, because those people would want to survive, and they couldn't survive without water, so they would have to go somewhere else. What I'm saying is that this problem that we're now discovering as of last year, whenever we put such great thought into this, and because of the computer, the satellite, the internet capability, because of smartphone technology, we understand that this phenomenon is not just happening on one particular continent. You got Canada, America, Mexico, America, and then you got South America. That's all one continent. This problem is not just happening pertaining to thermofrost and rivers and ponds and lakes and water reservoirs and watersheds and other aquador underground systems that we're seeing diminished and depleted. This isn't just happening here in America. If you'll go to your internet and if you'll look it up, you will discover the very same facts that I am discovering, that this is no longer just a one continent problem. This is a global problem that will escalate into the final last battle of all battles here upon to the planet, pertaining to the battle that's going to happen over at the river Euphrates, where the river itself will dry up, and because of survivalist issues, you will see people turn and become so barbaric and so unreal that you will see a battle just exactly what the Bible talks about. Could have this been prevented? I think so. I personally believe that these things could have been prevented in what we're discovering right now that's happening all over the planet. Let's listen to a little bit of this right here.
On competitiveness of the region and on whether you call it nearshoring or ally shoring or reshoring, it's a hugely consequential meeting regardless of what comes out of it.
And so when you say the most consequential meeting ever, why do you think that is? I know Ukraine and China, etc., but for the Americas, why is this the most important one?
I think there's a couple of reasons. First of all, what you see right now in terms of migration, you have talked about it on the show earlier today. This migration phenomenon is not just between the U.S. and Mexico or even Canada. This is a regional migration phenomenon. We see people coming from all over the hemisphere, and we see people coming from outside the hemisphere. And therefore, 6 months after the Los Angeles Declaration on Migration, and when the last nows committed to trying to find a regional solution to migration, this issue is one of great importance, not only for the 3 countries that are participating, but the entire region. Second, I think the trade tensions with China, post-pandemic recovery, and the importance of supply chains, and the ability for the American economy to prosper and create jobs depend to a great extent on what these presidents decide and whether they're really going to take advantage of these opportunities for companies and investment to look to North America and not as far away as they had in the past, but with the attendant difficulties we saw during the pandemic in supply chains. So it's crucial for the economic future of the United States and for the creation of jobs. And finally, I would say, when you look at some of the challenges that we're facing on the security front, especially as the president spoke about fentanyl, this most really potent of killers of 107,000 U.S. Citizens from overdoses last year. This is something that has to be handled in a regional North American way. If we try and tackle it by ourselves without the help of the Mexicans and others.
Over 100,000 people died of fentanyl overdoses in America alone, last year alone. 100,000 people. You're looking at the efficiency of basically, I'm going to say, all of Madison County. There may be just a little bit more people in Madison County, Jackson, Tennessee, here in western Tennessee. There may be a little bit more than 100,000 county-wide, but it won't be too much anymore. But if you was to take all them people in Madison County, Jackson, Tennessee, which is now a pretty good, thriving, metropolitan area. I mean, if you was to take all them people and they all disappear at one time, do you not think that that's going to also have an effect on the resources? Because whenever people die, it's not just their body that dies, but it's their ability of what that they can help humanity in, regardless whether they be a construction worker, regardless whether they be just a common laborer, or regardless whether they be an agriculture teacher or a professor, or somebody with great knowledge pertaining to science or whatever, or a doctor's degree, that also dies with them. Those resources die with that person. And that person and those resources die together. And even though that person may not have been able to have helped society, but just a very, very little, if you take out a whole plug of people at one time, you have taken out a big plug of resources, of people that can help. Now, out of those 100,000, I'm sure that there would be a certain percentage that somebody could narrow it down to, that would be people that would be dragging the system, or actually hurting or harming the system. I don't know what that category would be, but I'm pretty sure that you could put a pencil to it. And you could say, well, this amount of people in that 100,000 people are actually going to be disbeneficial to society rather than beneficial to society. But by and large, the good outweighs the bad, or it has been. If you take enough licks like this, lick after lick after lick, year after year after year, eventually you're going to destabilize your country, or you're going to destabilize the safety to your country to the degree that now you're going to see more bad than you are good. You're going to see more people that's going to be draining the system than you are enhancing the system. It's kind of like the bad apple theory. One bad apple in a whole bushel basket of good apples will spoil the whole bushel of apples. We know that because this is the common factors of the nature of the law, kind of like the law of gravity. We know that those things are going to occur. But on the same token, you can take one good apple and stick it in a bushel basket with all the rest of them being bad apples, and you're not going to change the concept of that one good apple going to be able to change the rest of the apples, because now it's outweighed. There's no way. A matter of fact, the good apple will become a bad apple even that much more quicker, because now it's surrounded by nothing but bad apples. In other words, it becomes a cancer. It grows. It expands. That's exactly what we're going to see with society, as we're seeing all these resources that's being diminished, regardless whether it be the resources of humans, the resources of their knowledge, the resources of their gifts, the resources of water, the resources of farming, the resources of food. What we're looking at is a calamity that is fixing to be fallen upon to a global society people, that if we're not smart enough to work through this and try to work out of this, it's only going to intensify to the degree of basically extermination. I hate to say that, but that's what I'm looking at within the next.
Your thoughts on the issue of the cartels? I mean, I think it would be
within the next 10 years from now, that's what we're going to be looking at. Major migration. Now, they're talking about the cartels here. Okay, they're talking about the dope people. They're talking about the drug lords here. Let's listen to this a little bit.
Smuggling, fentanyl, and all of the activities that they're involved with, they are just rolling in the billions of dollars. How does the reality of the cartels play a fact in what we're seeing in our southern border? And is there something that the United States, Mexico, and Canada can do to deal with this organization that is multinational and multi-billion?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jose, and I think there's a couple things we have to understand. First of all, the majority of deaths in the United States right now and overdoses come from synthetic drugs, whether that's opioids of fentanyl or others, or methamphetamine. They're much more focused on those commodities these days. And the problem with those is not only are they more lethal, but they're much easier to smuggle. They're easier to smuggle. They have higher rates of profit. You don't need to have people, growing things in large measure. You only need to have a chemist and a relatively small sort of warehouse or factory. And that makes this much more difficult to tackle. I think one of the things that we've seen in the last year or so is much greater seizures of fentanyl, but one never knows from seizures whether that simply means the total is higher. I think that the U.S. and Mexico have gotten back onto a good cooperation front after the pause that we saw after the disastrous detention of the former Army Chief Cienfuegos and the pause in law enforcement cooperation. But you also have to focus now on what the two countries can do on the whole supply chain. When we saw the capture the other day of Ovidio Guzman, the son of El Chapo Guzman, we know that that's important. It sends a signal that is crucial, but a high value target such as Ovidio Guzman does not end the commercial enterprise. You can't put Walmart out of business by simply removing the CEO. And so I think it's critical that now we work on the entire supply chain, whether that's demand, whether it's the funding. We've got to do more to dry up the funding. And one of the ways you deny funds following the money is to do the kinds of things the Biden administration is doing on migration, where people will not need to use smugglers to come into the United States. They will be able to do things on their app, get a QR code, get onto a plane, not go through those terribly risky and exploitative cartel territory. So all of this is part of a comprehensive solution.
And I don't know. I mean, I hope you're probably more optimistic than I am, but I don't see that coming anytime soon, where you can get a QR code and request asylum and not have to go through the horrors that people are going through. But Ambassador, it's always a pleasure to see you. I thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Jose.
And we have breaking news this morning from Georgia. The special Fulton County grand jury that has spent, 8 months investigating potential interference in Georgia's 2020 presidential election by former President Trump and his allies has completed its work and is being dissolved. According to the judge overseeing the panel, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. First to report this, the judge has scheduled the hearing for the 24th of January on whether the grand jury's report should be made public. NBC News has reached out to the Fulton County DA's office. They are not commenting. Former President Trump's attorney did not respond to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for comment.
Now, there's no doubt that that man right there, he stirred up a whole lot of stirring up. And he stirred it up, not just in America, but worldwide, globally. And I guess because of COVID, that helped to enhance that to some degree of now it's affecting other countries all over the world, which once more is a biblical Bible prophecy of the things that's going to occur pertaining to standoffs, pertaining to uprisings, pertaining to commotions, pertaining to wars and rumors of wars, and etc. These are all part of the prophecies that has already been put out there as a warning or some sort of pre-existing event that now we're seeing more and more each day towards it manifesting itself in the very way that the Bible has said that it's going to happen. What I'm getting at, pertaining to Donald Trump, though he done a lot of bad, there will be good. There will be a silver lining in all of this if we will gauge it and if we will monitor it and if we will deal with it in the proper form. Donald Trump's solution to the methanol problem, to the heavy narcotic drug dealers, is death. Kill them. Put them away and kill them. Do basically what China had to do over 100 years ago, whenever they had a heroin problem, towards basically genociding that particular population that wouldn't respond and wouldn't correct and would not reform. I'm not saying that that is the answer, but that could possibly be the answer, not just with the American government, also with the Mexican government, and also with other governments all over the country. Now, I didn't realize that Mexico was a country that their fundamental system is really quite different than ours. They have 32 federal entities, including Mexico City, capital of the country, 3 union powers inside. I don't think that they have a system set up quite like ours to where we have 3 checks and balances to where if one thing gets off focus, then the other 2 will step in to get the other one back in focus. I think that these countries are going to have to initiate some sort of a protecting policy plan. That way, all the money, all the greed, because if you don't watch, you're going to wind up with a communist controlled country, even though they may vote or give the appearances of voting, kind of like Russia. You're still going to have certain people in there, the oligarchs and the cartels, that are basically going to be in control of people's lives. And you're swapping one bad measure for another. And that ain't no good neither. Especially if the drug problem is still severe, and especially if the water problem is becoming more and more dire. And the food problem is becoming more and more dire. So we're going to have to tackle this in the right format. If we don't, it's only going to get worse.
Joining us now from Shanghai, NBC News, is Janice Mackey-Frayer. Janice, good morning. What can you tell us about this reopening of China?
Well, Jose, this is a day that so many people here have waited for, the chance to be able to travel to China without being forced into long quarantines on arrival. For 3 years, China, as we know, has had some of the toughest COVID controls of any country. Ending this part of it effectively reopens the country again to the world. At Shanghai's airport today, people were streaming into the country, which is something they haven't done since early 2020. Families and friends were reuniting. We met parents who hadn't seen their kids in months or years because of these quarantines.
See, because of the way that China tried to handle their problems over pertaining to the COVID, it has now brought forth other problems pertaining to supply chain issues. And those problems aren't just in America. Those problems are global because the world basically got contaminated by becoming so dependent upon China about having flat screen TVs and computers and cell phones and cheaper clothes and cheaper this and cheaper that. So whenever China went down, it's actually affected the supply chain issues all over the world. In one essence, towards trying to get the balances right, it may be a good thing because now it opens up the door for others to become more self-reliant, self-dependent upon energy and clothing and etc., having their own telephone services and having their own chips being made and etc., to where now each country can stand on its own if we do things proper. If we don't, what we're going to see is more massive killings, more massive outbreaks, and more massive problems. And that is not what I want to see, and I don't think any logical, civilized person wants to see, no matter if they be an American or in some other type of country. I don't think that's anything that anybody wants to see. Now, let's go right here pertaining to the massive, irregular forces of nature. Like I told you all ago, I was actually glad that a lot of these reservoirs are being filled up, though it is causing the problems that it's causing pertaining to the deluges that's coming out of the sky. And I'm sure there's going to be lots of people that's going to drown. There's going to be lots of real estate that's going to be ruined. But in the long term, by filling up those reservoirs, is going to keep those people not only from going through other levels of catastrophe, but it's also going to help people like east of the Mississippi River towards not having to go through a massive exchange of migration towards people migrating over here because they didn't have enough water over there. I realize one hand washes the other. I wish that we had control of these factors, but once more, there is damages being done to the upper atmosphere pertaining to all the gases that's going up into that atmosphere that China needs to pay attention to here. That's basically making our weather patterns that much more irregular, in addition to the heat that's being generated from the planet and the heat that the human sources and all these inventions are creating. But whenever the heat goes up into the atmosphere that's much hotter, it causes the moisture to go up into the upper atmosphere that much higher. That holds more moisture, and then whenever it does release the moisture, it releases it all at once in the form of a deluge. We have seen the same thing over here in the interstates again and again and again. Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, other areas that have gotten these massive, massive irregular forces of nature that comes out of nowhere, to the point that now we're seeing on levels of being normal that used to not be normal, of feast or famine. Feast or famine, feast or famine, feast or famine. In other words, it's either too much rain or no rain. It's either too much sunshine or no sunshine. I mean, we're seeing things occurring on this planet that even 10 years ago was not expected, much less 20 years ago or even 30 years ago. So if we don't look at these problems in a much more deeper frame of mind, we're never going to be able to solve them. And one of the major issues that I continue to keep telling people about is the sin of humanity. The sin of humanity. It talks about the sin of humanity pertaining to the extreme, harsh, intense, humongous sorrows that will fall upon humanity. And it also talks about that whenever you shall start to see these things, woe be unto the inhabitants hereupon to the planet, in knowing that there is going to be major irregularities of the things that used to be declared as being normal, now will be absolutely off the charts. And there's really no way for the meteorologist or scientist to determine on whether or not California is going to have another wet season next year that they actually needed, or if it's going to go bone dry again for the next 4 to 10 years. But I'd like for you to listen to some of this, because I got a niece out in California, pretty close to Stockton, California, pretty close to Lodi, and up towards the Sacramento area where the capital is. She's up into that area, and just within the past week, she sent us some pictures over here to Tennessee of a big massive tree that fell on her carport and destroyed not only the carport, but the car inside the carport, which was her personal car, pertaining to the massive trees that's falling because of the extreme weather patterns.
More on that ahead.
Of the extreme weather patterns that's now being generated out there because of humanity not paying close enough attention to what we should have been paying close enough attention to. It's one thing to pay attention to the fentanyl problem. It's one thing to pay attention to the problem with the illegal immigration problem. It's another thing to pay attention to all the other problems that one problem adds to the other problem. And if we don't tackle all the problems, these problems will only grow and fester and get worse.
Need to make a point. I think the leadership is arguing that this is not the time to make a point if they don't get this this rules package passed, McCarthy's speakership is probably in doubt, and they can't begin the work of the House of Representatives. And I think they're going to be able to pass this. But this is going to be, Jose, one of the big recurring themes in the House Republican majority, whether moderates are going to take a stand on issues that they don't agree with the conservatives on, whether it's abortion, whether it's immigration policy, the debt ceiling. All of this is going to be the subject of hot debate in House Republican circles for the next 2 years.
And Brendan, I'm just wondering, I mean, this is something that you, of course, dealt with in your past, with Republicans angling to vote on bills that will tighten.
Right now, I would not want to be associated with government in any form or fashion. And I look up to the people that do want to hold those positions, regardless whether it be a county mayor or a deputy or a statesman or somebody working for the federal government. I look up to those people because they're going to have some extreme challenges in the next 5 to 7 years from now in areas like they could never, ever begin to famine. And it's not just going to be in America.
Had to make that
It's
go
going to
beyond
be all over the world.
Things that have to do with cutting spending, the debt limit. These are things that he's not just necessarily promising he's going to take a stab at them. He seems to be promising outcomes. He seems to be talking
we wasn't smart enough, obviously, intelligent enough to realize that whenever the Bible talks about that he will throw us off into a sick bed, indicating that we should have had our eyes and ears open rather than being hit blindsidedly by COVID. We should have already had institutions set up to where if something like that occurred, we could handle it. Well, guess what? We got hit blindsidedly, and it has costed the American people. Over 1 million people has died because of COVID. Once more, that's a strain on the resources. You're just not causing human fleshly bodies to die, but you're causing their abilities to die too as well. You're causing their knowledge to die. The gifts that went along with that person died. Their abilities to be kind, gentle, to be fortitude, to have grace and knowledge and wisdom, and being able to help in these areas and those areas and do this and do that. All that dies with them. It's not just the body that dies. It's everything that goes along with that package dies.
Well, first of all, let's understand that this is not a rules package. This is a summary of a hostage note. This is a list of concessions that Kevin McCarthy had to make to liberate himself and become speaker. The minority does have tools, but it's I was in the majority, I was in the minority, I was in the leadership. Those tools will be wielded effectively by Hakeem Jeffries, but it's not. It falls to the Republicans to govern. Jose, after the election, we knew we had divided government. What we know now is that it's not only divided, but the Republican caucus is dangerously divided between moderates and extremists, which means every time that Kevin McCarthy has...
Now, where did that come from? That come from the high stakes, and it also come from the works of the Luciferian Lucifer that's out to kill, steal, and destroy, that's the author of confusion. He has got into these institutions, and he has caused such of a dilemma and problems that it just goes beyond most people's imagination. And if we think that these things are going to just up and disappear and go away, they're not. They're not. If you think that once we're back to normal and we're recovering from COVID and we don't no longer have to worry about being attacked again by another pandemic, you're fooling yourself. Unless we can learn our lessons will be repeated again and again. And this is where the sin factor comes in at, that if we don't live a life that's on a godly standard way, then we pay the consequences for that, because God the Father will no longer protect that mass or that country or that nation, and he will cause all these problems to just explode to the point that one problem exacerbates another problem, that exacerbates another problem, that you get to scratching your head, my God, are we ever going to dig our way out of this hole? Well, the people that should be held accountable for this, you should go back to them 30 plus years ago, regardless whether it's be government officials or the media that has put us where we are right now, because we should not be here. We should not be where we're at right now. The whole world should have been turned around in the late 80s towards seeing a great grand revival that would have resonated into a world global revolution. We didn't see that. Why did we not see that?
John Boehner.
Because people was deceived. The Luciferian Lucifer had deceived them. And they thought that, let's go for the brass ring ourselves. Let's be greedy and selfish and let's not worry about nobody else. And let's just fill our own pockets up. Well, you've done that. That generation of people has done that in the past 30 years. Now, in the meantime, look at all the suffering that is caused. All our jobs went south. People now has low span educational skills pertaining to low memories, toward not being able to remember things. The drug problem has exceeded anything above and beyond that anybody could ever imagine here in America. The drug problem has only enhanced the gun problem. And once more, one thing has exacerbated another thing to the point that now we're seeing it snowball right in front of our very eyes. And if we don't get a grasp on this, just as I have said before, that it's only the Bible fulfilling itself towards Satan will come down in great wrath because he knoweth his time is short. He has tried to convince so many people that he was for them, that he liked them, that he wanted to help them. And he has only lied and deceived to them. That's exactly what the Luciferian Lucifer is. He's nothing more than a murderer and a liar, because Christ said that he was that way from the beginning. From the beginning. And if we don't go back, as the Bible talks about in the first 4 chapters of Revelations in the King James Version Bible, go back. Because God ain't found our works perfect yet. If we don't go back to the drawing board, if we don't go back to the cross, these things are only going to exacerbate and get even worse. If there's ever been a time that we needed wisdom and knowledge from God, what are we going to do when all these rivers and all these water resources and all these tributaries and all this stuff goes dry? We should be working right now in designing some way or another of getting mass amounts of H2O out of the oceans and the lakes, or the oceans and the seas, of translating that salt water into drinking water, that I don't even know if that's being taken serious or not. I know it already has over in Jerusalem, and it already has become serious over in Saudi Arabia and maybe another country or two. But as far as it happening massively on mass levels, we're not seeing that neither. We're not seeing that neither. We're not seeing global warming being taken seriously over in China and India and other countries.
NBC News, and first reported by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. NBC's Blaine Alexander joins me now by phone. She has...
I get so tired of listening to that. That just absolutely is one of the most horrifying things that could have ever happened to America, because it becomes such of a distraction in areas that we should be focusing on, but we're focusing on areas that we shouldn't be focusing on because of all this distraction. There's no doubt there's going to be a silver lining that's going to come from this, providing that we deal with these things on a proper level. If we don't deal with them on a proper level, they're only going to exacerbate and even get worse. They're going to get worse and worse and worse. So we're going to have some good Einsteins in there towards trying to figure out the little problems all exacerbate the bigger problems exacerbate the little problems, and until we can get our thumb on this and get to the bottom of all this, we're going to continue to be moving just like a dog chasing after its tail. We're going to be moving, but we ain't going to be going nowhere. And that's basically what's happened to America for the past 30 plus years. We've taken one step forward and two steps back. One step forward and two steps back. And you don't continue to do that again and again and again without seeing major, major complications and repercussions.
Some criticism for not meeting with migrants. He's previously faced criticism from Republicans for not visiting the border sooner, as border cities face growing numbers of arriving migrants. NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba is traveling with the president in Mexico City. We're also joined by Cristobal Alex, former president of the Latino Victory Project, former senior advisor to the Biden campaign, and an MSNBC political contributor. Great seeing you both. So, Monica, what's on the president's agenda today?
Well, Jose, first off, the president will be meeting with his Mexican counterpart, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, AMLO, as he is known here in Mexico, and the two will have a lot to discuss. There's very much on the agenda, but at the top of the list, likely what President Biden saw for himself for the first time up close as president yesterday when he was in El Paso. He, of course, wanted to go, in the words of the White House, to assess the situation, to encounter what he has been described to by all of his aides as this major humanitarian crisis, and a problem really that he has talked about in these terms of inheriting, but of course wanting to do something more to solve it. So President Biden will be talking to AMLO specifically about now how Mexico is helping with this issue in terms of some of the migrants who are now going to be expelled back to this country when they reach the U.S. border, but also some new pathways for migrants from those countries, Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, which is now where you're seeing a lot more of the migration coming from. A couple of years ago, that wasn't the case. It was more from Mexico and the Northern Triangle, those Central American countries. So as we've seen this very important shift, the president will be talking to AMLO about how they can improve that. And the context and backdrop to all of that is that this isn't just a major migration challenge, but there's also a human trafficking element, a drug trafficking element. So fentanyl will also be on the agenda when these two leaders speak later today. So the two of them will be talking for an extended amount of time this evening before then heading to a dinner with the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And the three amigos, as they are sometimes called and referred to more casually, will get together and talk about all of these issues that are confronting all of North America before tomorrow officially having the summit, where again they will discuss many of these incredibly difficult and complicated topics, in addition to things like climate change, like an energy policy. Mexico really wants the United States help when it comes to a major solar project that's closer to the southern border. And so that's something AMLO is going to be asking President Biden for help with, as well as a...
And that's exactly what they're going to have to do. They're going to have to recreate their thinking rather than making all their money off of drugs with the cartels, which I've been told that that's one reason why that America hadn't moved on the problem with so many illegal immigrants coming over here, was because the cartels is basically holding America hostage towards putting us in behind the black ball in the degree of damned if you do and damned if you don't. Well, there comes a point in time, if that be the case, in which I'm not saying that it is, but there comes a point in time that you have to say, well, you know what? I'd rather go this way than go that way, towards choosing between the lesser of the two evils, because the way that we're going right now is going to be catastrophic to our society. And maybe Biden has finally woken up to that and realizing that these countries that are causing this are obviously going to have to do something major towards recreating, reinventing their own government, and how that they formulate themselves towards having stuff over there that looks promising, or the potential of being promising. That way people will want to stay in Mexico. They'll want to stay there. And why wouldn't a person want to stay on their own property, in their own ground, in recognizing their own geographics, their own rivers, their own lakes, their own whatever, woods, forestry, whatever? Why wouldn't a person want to stay in their own area that they're more familiar with, other than to go to another country? Ordinarily they do, unless the survivalist has reached a point that they can no longer survive. And that's what Mexico, that's what all them countries down there in South America, including Brazil, and that's what Canada, and that's what all the other countries, give or take around 200 nations or countries, is going to have to do. They're going to have to reinvent themselves towards how that they tackle climate change and offering stability to their own citizens. That way, instead of their citizens wanting to leave, their citizens will want to enhance their own country. They'll want to better their own lives. They'll want to stay there and create families and have memories, have good memories towards what that we achieved and what that we conquered. That's what people over here in America need to do. You know, the churches over here in America has been so blessed in being able to send missionaries over to third world countries, places like India and Africa and other diminished areas that have been behind the eight ball pertaining to third world countries, or those that have been damaged pertaining to great storms and hurricanes or whatever, droughts or whatever. But we have a major need right here in America in these people that need to reform ourselves in how we think and how we transpond to these different problems. On one level, maybe the short-term answer is, like Donald Trump talked about, is taking all these people that's continually bringing all this fentanyl over here and all these other types of drugs that's killing people. Maybe the answer to that is killing those people. I don't know. I'm not a politician. That's one of the reasons why I don't want to be a politician. I didn't know until just a while ago reading that the country of Mexico outlawed capital punishment as a country. Not as a state or an entity, but as a country. And who would have passed that law? And why was that law passed? You can't control some of these evil, mean, cruel people by being lenient and lax on them. Your laws will become just as hypocritical as our own laws here in America, to the point of people basically making a mockery out of those laws. You're going to have to put people in place that's going to be strong and stern in these areas to be able to take care of we the people. And if you don't, you're going to soon see the dark forces exceed the forces of light. I personally believe one of the quickest ways of resolving that problem with the illegals is to change the monetary and money currency. I don't care if you just change the color of the dollar bill in America, change it to another color. And I realize that's going to...
Trip is for the president?
I realize that in a way that's just buying time. And eventually those same crooked, dishonest people that rather steal than they would work are going to catch on towards how to make more counterfeit money with a different color. I realize that. But at least it will give us a little bit of time to catch up. As of right now, the black market, the illegal market, has now exceeded over the legal market. And a lot of people feel like that's the only way that they're going to be able to survive, is to deal under the table. Well, by doing that, you're exacerbating the problem even worse. You're snowballing the problem even worse. And that problem needs to be handled and attacked not just on one front, but all the fronts in all the countries, if they're going to get a handle on this illegal black market trade. That was one of the primary reasons in 1983 that I made gestures in this area that they needed to legalize marijuana for medical marijuana purposes and medical marijuana purposes only. I was laughed at, I was scorned, I was made fun of, I was demonized and dehumanized by the majority of the churches around here that wanted to basically hex me. Well, their hexing me has now hexed themselves. It is not, well, the elderly and the baby boomers, well, they're doing all right because they still got a system that's taking care of them, and what money that they've made, they've got a decent savings account and they're living in a decent house and a decent car. They wear decent clothes. They got decent insurance. But how about all those other people that basically you stole their future because you would not attack the problems the way that the problems needed to be attacked? And now we've got even more problems. That's exacerbating the other problems. And until we get a handle on what's happening, us as a civilized global society will not become more civilized, according to what I'm looking at, pertaining to the rivers and the river Euphrates and the waterway systems and the lakes and all this other stuff. Instead of us becoming more civilized, we're going to become more uncivilized, especially whenever such of a strain comes upon to that particular culture of people, whenever it comes to survivalist issues. I mean, you can look at places in Africa and pretty well go by that because the weather over there has turned so drastic pertaining to the drastic famines and droughts that basically it's brought out the Zulu tribes to the point that now only the strongest survive. Headhunters. Cannibalism. That's a very, very sick, harsh thought to think of. But that could not only happen to Africa, but that could happen to other countries too as well, if we don't get a handle on what we're facing.
Cabinet inside the presidential palace just hours after it and other government buildings were attacked by thousands of supporters of the country's former president, Jair Bolsonaro. It was a scene reminiscent of January 6th in Washington. So far, more than 400 people have been arrested. More than 1,400 are actually being detained. Overnight, Bolsonaro tweeted that invasions of public buildings...
See, these uprisings, these countries that are basically imploding, it's not just Iran. It's not just where the Ayatollah Khomeinis used to reside in. It's not just over in Africa. It's not just over in China. It's not just over in America pertaining to seeing people being displeased pertaining to how their government is running things, but it's basically across the board. And that, my friend, is a very, very challenging, scary thing to look at from the global perspective of looking through the lenses of what we can see that is occurring all over the planet.
The riots that happened yesterday, the protesting, all of it could be something difficult for Lula da Silva to deal with because Bolsonaro, the former president, had left Brazil before that transition of power, and a lot of his followers had been upset. But today, there's response from the international community. Leaders from across the world are showing their support for Lula da Silva. As moments ago you mentioned, now there's a statement, a joint statement coming from all the North American leaders. President Joe Biden, Andrés Manuel López Obrador from Mexico, and Justin Trudeau from Canada, all included in a statement issued by the White House showing their support, calling this an attack on democracy, and indicating that they look forward to working with Lula da Silva, the new president of Brazil, something which is very important. Da Silva had been sworn in on January 1st, so they are in the initial stages of their government. So this is good news for him, for his government, to have that support coming from the international community.
Now, let me ask you a question. Do you really think that this is going to be the only uprising that's going to happen in a faraway land, in a faraway country? No. As things strain because of COVID, because of the money issues, because of the supply chain issues. You're going to have more disturbances like this, which verifies the Bible in the last days, that there will be wars and rumors of wars and commotions and etc. Once again, the people in this particular area didn't have enough faith to want to partner up with the founder of the Windmill Ministries missions that has led us endlessly down this road that now we can see. Now we can see.
More bad weather is on the way. The warnings for residents, plus the investigation into the Virginia school shooting, where police say.
Now we can see, with all the shootings and all the drug overdoses and all the other problem with the fentanyl, being $30+ trillion in debt, now we can see what these people have done that they're going to have to live with. These people are going to have to live with this, because I know they don't want to face and accept the fact that they had something to do with how that the country has turned out to be so crappy and how that the world has turned out to be so crappy. They think that they're not going to be held accountable for these actions. They think that they shouldn't be held accountable for these actions. I think they will be. I think they will be, and I think even to this day, they're still being standoffish. They're not quite as ugly as what they was when I first come back to Northwest Tennessee in 2014, 15, 16, and 17, leading to the death of my brother, towards them pulling the stunts that they did, towards arresting me the way that they did, even though it was my brother and I that was concerned about some children across the road. They're not being quite as ugly about it, but at the same time, they haven't come clean on it. They haven't
2 million.
They haven't acknowledged the facts of what that they didn't do is just as important of the things that they did do, going all the way back into the late 80s, early 90s. I mean, the founder of the Windmill Ministries has went through hell, H-E-double-L, on one area versus another, either in one state or the other, in trying to promote and get his message out to the general public. Why is that? Because I was basically a one-man pony show, and because of it, it made me very vulnerable. To where if I would have been a Joe Osteen with the 25 plus 40 million supporters, they better have pretty good proof before they come after Joe Osteen, because they're going to have 25 to 40,000 people that's going to be standing in Joe Osteen's corner. And the feds know this. The state knows this. The counties know this, depending upon one's capability of their clout. It's only been since 2017, I think it was 2015, that my brother and I bought smartphone technology for the first time. And it's only been recently that I've been able to get my message out either on YouTube or social media platform that extends my clout to the point that, hey, other people can now hear and see what's going on in Juby Jackson's life. Hey, other people in other countries, in other areas of the world, can now observe and see what Mr. Jackson was trying to do towards going out west and identifying that there was a government cover-up, towards trying to help the people up in Kentucky by telling them that there was going to be electrical disturbances. It was Dennis Jackson that put out the memo in 2005 of a bloody road ahead. And sure enough, we have exceeded and expanded that. More so now than what we ever have. And it's going to continue to get worse if we don't get a handle on what's happening. Let's watch this devastation out in California that I was telling you about earlier, pertaining to my niece, up around Lodi, Stockton, California.
On the West Coast are facing some sort of flood watch or warning right now. The National Weather Service warns California is in the path of a, quote, relentless parade of cyclones to come this week. Thousands are being ordered to evacuate in some areas. Over the weekend, strong wind knocked over trees and power lines in some places, leaving more than 100,000 people without power in the state. NBC's Marisa Parra is in Capitola in Central California with the very latest.
See, California is a very, very culture safe, pleasant place by and large to live in. And whenever it comes to their hills and hollers pertaining to their landscape, it's a beautiful, beautiful place to go to. In some of the areas, I mean, it's just absolutely, I mean, you think the Smoky Mountains of the ridges and the hills and places up in the Ozark Mountains and other places are beautiful. So are they. But you keep in mind, a lot of those areas, because they had become adapted to so much drought and so lack of rain, they went ahead and they built towns and cities in low-lying areas down in the valleys that are now susceptible or prone, vulnerable towards, with this type of rainfall coming over the hillside, of flooding their whole town, similar towards what we either seen in Waverly, Tennessee, or similar towards what we seen last year before last in Waverly, Tennessee, or what we seen last year over in eastern Kentucky, over around Hazel, Kentucky, towards massive flooding. And then we've also seen it in Texas. We've also seen it in Mississippi. We've seen it in parts of other parts of the area that has basically just been drenched. What are you trying to say, Dennis? I'm trying to say all the above has everything in the world to do to what we're doing to the planet, pertaining to global warming, pertaining to the petroleum oil industries that obviously accepted this lie, hook, line, and sinker, that global warming was not real up until basically about a year ago, that now they're starting to look at this in a serious type manner of understanding that, yes, what we are doing to the planet is affecting our lives. And it's really going to be horrifying. That's one of the reasons why I feel like that Christ said to flee into the mountains. He wasn't just telling us to flee into the mountains to obtain safety and to be away from the troubles and away from society with all the troubles. He was telling us to get out of the low-lying areas because of the flooding issues. I feel so sorry for a lot of these islands and a lot of these smaller countries, like Puerto Rico and places like that, even Cuba. I mean, they're very vulnerable and susceptible in getting these massive, massive flooding hurricanes that no longer produce 4 to 6 to 8 inches of rain. Now they produce 24 to 30 plus inches of rain. Well, I don't care how well adapted that you may think that you are. Odds of you handling that type of flow, the volume of that type of flow, and walk away without being unscathed is about slim to none. Let's listen.
It's Marisa.
Jose, the wind and the rain has been relentless, and I want to show you why that matters. So, as you mentioned, we're at Capitola Beach. Take a look at this. It doesn't look very much like a beach right now. If you pan over here, this is a sea of debris, and needless to say, this is not what this normally looks like. And what you have to remember...
Now, whenever you see that, you're thinking to yourself, oh, isn't that bad? It ruined their beach for a while. Well, guess what? They're going to have to pay somebody to go out there and sift through all that and clean it. And then they're going to have to worry about the contaminants on the sand.
Show you some of the residual damage from that. So take a look. These are restaurants here. These are popular for people who both live here, for tourists. And when you look over here, obviously it is now sectioned off. What you cannot see on the other side of where this fencing is broken windows, broken glass. From when we're told the waves were so high, the water was at such a high level that logs and trees were being thrown into the businesses. So obviously those have now been closed off. If if you look further out in the distance, we know that we've shown you this before. This is a big, big sign of how strong those winds and how strong those waves were. Look at that pier, that wharf over there, just cut right down the middle, washed away, that big chunk of it. So when we're talking about the damage, the impact of the rain that we're continuing to get, that is on top of what we've already seen. So when we look at this debris, this isn't just here. This is in a lot of parts of Santa Cruz Mountains. And a big concern is when you have creeks, when you have rivers that are cresting and overflowing, you're going to have pressure points when you have dams, makeshift dams that are being formed as a result of debris just like this. So, Jose, we understand that President Biden has approved the emergency declaration for the state of California. We also understand that parts of California, like the county that we are in, are under evacuation warnings. Now, this is not a place that has an evacuation order just yet, but there are evacuation orders happening around places like rivers that are already cresting. And mind you, something that's very concerning for people here, and particularly emergency officials, is those rivers are rising at rates much faster than they expected. So, Jose, we're expecting more rain on the way, on top of all the winds, toppling down more trees, on top of the fact that this soil is not used to this type of rain. It is very vulnerable right now. So there is the concern of mudslides, which we already know has shut down several highways around here. So, Jose, this is really expected to get worse before it gets better.
Lisa Bata, thank you so very much. A Virginia elementary school will remain.
Now you keep in mind that what you just got to witnessing was one broadcaster in one particular area in California that tried to give you a broad perspective of what is occurring right now all over California. And there's no way that you can, there's no way that you or me or anybody else is going to be able to recognize the seriousness of the perspective unless we was to listen to all the media entities that's formigating this and putting this out there to the world right now. There's going to be loss of life, there's going to be loss of property, and there's going to be tremendous damage that's going to happen pertaining to this. Like I said, California is a beautiful place. It really is. That's the reason why so many people wanted to launch out there and raise their families. But it's also a very dangerous place if the weather becomes erratic like it is, towards going from feast to famine, basically, from daylight to dark, in an erratic type way of going from being too dry, now from being too wet. And of course, you take all them fires out there that burnt all those woodland areas. You're talking about areas that is super, super vulnerable because now the root system has died that held that ground together. And you're talking about extensive damage that can occur, especially going down a strong hillside where you no longer have trees that used to hold the ground together, and you're having extensive rains. You're talking about severe problems.
That is a good thing, actually. The House has had a chokehold on allowing backbenchers and middlebenchers to have more say. Kevin gave them that. The problem is, who constitutes those backbenchers and middlebenchers are the same people that aided and abetted Donald Trump in the insurrection and the narrative of trying to steal the election. There's also qualitative.
I guess the bottom line is this, pertaining to what I'm trying to say, is that man right there that just got through going through 15 rounds of voting, debating, snarling at one another, growling at one another, being ugly at one another towards getting his job. I don't think he has no earthly ideal. I mean, he does to some extent because he's already brought a lot of this out to the American people and what's been going on. But in reality, I really don't think that him or Congress or a great deal of the people that work for government legislation, rather not it be federal, state, or local, has any idea where this is all going in the next few years pertaining to global crises that's only intensifying rather than it getting better, it's getting worse. And it ain't just going to be getting worse for the people out in California. It's going to be getting worse all over the world that the Bible put out advisories towards in talking about these sorrows, talking about these events. And the Bible says to pray that you're either worthy to escape these things or pray that you can endure these things. Because the Bible done already foreseen that these things was in fact going to happen because of the magnitude of humanity in not paying attention to what is happening and what is happening to themselves and what is happening to the planet. I want to say good luck to all of us and say God bless you, God bless America, God bless our troops. Good luck to each and every one of us as we go through the year 2023 and debating and looking and analyzing and deciphering and trying to figure out this and that. I just pray to God that people will come out of their stupor, that they will come out of this onslaught of blindness that they're obviously in, that Satan has put them under, pertaining to being bewitched, and that they will open up their eyes in realizing, checkmate, where we are, where we could possibly go, and where we're going to be inevitably towards going if we don't awaken and change our ways. Thank you. God bless you. And once again, as we end our program by saying, Shalom.